In April last year, the Prime Minister launched Australia's cybersecurity strategy, and that relates to the topic of organisational risk in a connected world. And it relates to that because this year, about 13 or 14 months after the strategy was launched, it is apparent, it's clear to me, it's clear to others that work in the ecosystem, that the discussion has changed. The discussion has changed from one of compliance to risk. The discussion has changed from being largely in a technology area to increasingly being had in boardrooms. The discussion has changed with practitioners that are selling services to companies. And at this point, I would probably ask people whether, as they think about this, whether or not the conversation has changed for them. Whether you are someone that is a consumer of security services or someone that sells security services. Now, the reason for that dramatic change in the last sort of 13 or 14 months isn't just because of a cybersecurity strategy. I'll say to you that the strategy is being faithfully executed by us in the Commonwealth, and I will run through the key parts of that strategy. But to me, there are three clear events that have actually helped shift the discussion for me in this role in that last 14 months. The first happened in August last year, which was the failure of our census. And when you look back at it, it was actually quite a minor matter. It was a minor matter in the sense that it was a series of very small denial of service attacks, and it was the Australian Bureau of Statistics choosing to take that website offline. But if you have a look at the reaction, both politically and publicly, to those events, it was quite a significant turning point for government. It was a significant turning point in the sense that it called into question the government's ability to deliver digital services in an era where the public increasingly expects seamless digital service delivery, whether that's from the private sector or the public sector. So the census events were really important for us as a learning experience, and we can go over all of the events. But the most important thing for me was a shift in conversation in the corridors of Canberra, where secretaries and agency heads were suddenly having a discussion about risk rather than compliance. They were having a discussion about resilience of their services versus just security. And that's an important shift in the language. And it wasn't just in Canberra, it wasn't just government agencies, Commonwealth government agencies. It was state and territory governments. As I would go and speak to them, you would hear a shift in the language. And perhaps more importantly still, it was in boardrooms as I would speak to boards, or in C-suites as we spoke to CEOs and others in organisations. A dramatic shift, and a good shift, because as the chief statistician will say, the data was fine. Nothing was lost, nothing was manipulated, and the statistics that come out of that are still very valid statistics. So a great learning experience for us. The next tipping point for this role actually occurred later in the year, which was during the US presidential election. It's now widely recognised on all sides of politics in the United States that a foreign government, Russia, actively sought to influence the outcomes of a democratic election. Quite a remarkable thing. Governments, of course, have used soft power for years to try to change outcomes of elections. That's what governments do. But in this case, it was the use of cyber tools to actively try to change the outcome of the election. Now, whether or not that occurred is for others to decide and for others to debate over a long time in terms of the outcome. But the actual act itself, in fact, is increasingly looking like it was quite a sophisticated long-term campaign by one state against another. So just yesterday there was evidence given in the United States that said that there were over several dozen states that would appear to have had malware coming from Russia, looking to change either voter rolls or the enrolment of people in those elections. Quite a remarkable thing. And of course we saw it happen again in France, too late to influence the outcome there, and quite disciplined on the part of the French media. But still, pretty significant because it goes to the very heart of the things we're trying to protect in government. Nothing else we do as a Commonwealth really matters if the institutions that govern us could be influenced. And as a result of those matters, during that Christmas New Year period, we were asked by the Prime Minister to brief opposition and crossbench parties, not just the political leaders, but their political wings as well, to explain the type of threat environment. And what I can say to you is that in the time I've been in this role, while it says that I'm the Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on cybersecurity, I'm actually a bureaucrat. I sit inside the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. I answer to the Prime Minister on these matters. I answer also to the Secretary of the Department as well. But these are bipartisan issues. In fact, they're multi-partisan issues. There is no debate in Canberra anymore on whether or not cyber is important. So those two things, the census and then the US election, really brought into stark relief. And then, of course, a few weekends ago, you may have noticed on the news that the elements of the UK health system were locked up with a ransomware campaign, the WannaCry ransomware campaign. Now, for those people who know cybersecurity, they'll know that there are ransomware campaigns all the time conducted against businesses in this country, quite successful, sadly raise an awful lot of revenue. And these are often global campaigns, and as I say, impact businesses right across our economy and the world. But what was different about WannaCry, what made it significant was that it impacted upon critical services at a scale that we hadn't seen before. And to any politician, whether they're state or federal, to any large business that operates infrastructure, to start seeing things like hospitals closing their doors strikes fear. And it should. So again, while there were only something like 18 reported matters to Australian agencies, all from very small businesses, several of which were able to actually get back up and running again from their backups, fantastic, we dodged a bullet. We dodged a bullet not just because of WannaCry, but we dodged a bullet because of a recognition that there are global campaigns that can be run, that can indeed impact critical infrastructure. Now again, any practitioner in this space, anyone that's been in this space for long enough knows that that could happen. We've all said it for a long time. But for the first time ever, again, for the first time ever, all in this same period, we've had living examples that we can finally point not just to our political masters, but to our corporate masters, if that's where we work, and frankly out to the public to have a conversation. And those three incidents to me actually, in many respects, quite minor. A census that was taken offline but didn't impact our statistics. A US election that may or may not have been influenced at the margins by a state activity, and a ransomware campaign that took some hospitals offline for a while and impacted a few other bits of critical infrastructure around the world, and frankly, just some small businesses. Sad for those businesses, and I'm not downplaying it for them. Have put into stark relief for those around us that these matters are real and these matters need to be taken into account. And that's why I say our conversation has moved from one of compliance to one of risk, why it's moved from the conversation of security to resilience, and that's a much better place for us to be having a conversation. It's a much better place because it's a more realistic place. And increasingly, we're talking about this being an all-hazards type of matter. Now, bureaucrats have been talking about that for a long time. It's a threat vector. Cyber is a threat vector. It's a threat vector just like a bushfire is, just like a power outage at a data centre. It's just a threat vector. Take it into account, make yourself as resilient as possible and have your business up and running. But we haven't done that well. Now, the strategy that the Prime Minister launched is a comprehensive strategy. And I would also say in these tough economic times is a funded strategy, $230 million over 4 years, an additional $400 million in the Defence White Paper to build Defence's capacity when it comes to matters cyber. So a funded strategy, more money in the National Innovation and Science Agenda. So it's not a lack of money. And as I say, it's quite an ambitious strategy. In that strategy, there's more staff for the Australian Federal Police, there's more staff for the Criminal Intelligence Commission, there's more staff for the Computer Emergency Response Team. That's good, because frankly, all of those services need to scale to help protect an economy. But if all we did was add staff and all we did was add money to those Commonwealth agencies, the strategy would fail. We wouldn't be able to live up to those increased expectations that those 3 incidents, minor as they were in actual impact. But the strategy goes beyond that. The strategy talks about information sharing. Now, I know there are some people in the room here that we deal with on that, and again, it's easier said than done that we would share information. There's an expectation on the part of industry that we would share it quickly. Frankly, when it came to the WannaCry matter, we didn't do as good a job as we should have in sharing that out. As an example, what we knew, when we knew, what the solutions were. We didn't help necessarily as well as we could in terms of information exchange. But if all we talked about was adding people to the wall to defend and better sharing threat information, that strategy won't scale to help an economy that relies so much upon these services. And it won't help change that discussion from a binary secure, insecure to one of resilience, where the strategy isn't about looking at the negatives, but helping ensure that we can use these technologies to realise the economic and social benefits that come with those connected technologies. So it's not just the defenders and it's not just the information sharing. The strategy also put in place a significant framework of leadership. There's the Prime Minister who has this inside his portfolio, and I can tell you he is very clearly engaged on this matter. He gets it, and that creates some good political pressure for me. There's a minister assisting the Prime Minister on cybersecurity in the form of Dan Tehan, again, a minister who is very keen on this. He also happens to be the Defence Personnel Minister and also the Minister for Veterans Affairs, so well connected into the defence bureaucracy that is very important to us in terms of our Commonwealth capacity. We have an Ambassador for Cyber Affairs that Noel mentioned in the form of Toby Feakin, and his job is to marshal the services, the significant services of foreign affairs and trade, to leverage our international assets, to make sure that we help create a norms-based international regime. One where no government is in control, but one that perpetuates the multi-stakeholder model of the internet that has allowed it to grow so well. One that makes sure that nations know where they can and can't go, still in that loose multi-stakeholder environment. We don't want to see, as a nation, we don't want to see, frankly, as a population, a balkanisation of the internet, as some countries would want to see. So we're talking about a norms-based international regime that Toby is out pushing. And importantly, leveraging our significant diplomatic assets to do that. We are a country with great reach there. But part of the strategy also calls for this concept of not having any international safe havens, making sure that while the internet is free and open, there's a comma, but not a safe haven for criminality or bad acts. And part of Toby's job is also to make sure that there is that international legal framework in place, from the Budapest Convention through to helping nation states build their capacity to help fight criminality. We have an interest as a nation in increasing the security of others in the online space. And if that's all we did, it'd be pretty good. It'd be fit for purpose, but it goes further. The best things about the strategy, the best things about this strategy are really where we talk about developing our sovereign capabilities in terms of cyber. And there are 2 key assets there. And again, none of this existed in April last year when the Prime Minister launched the strategy. Data 61, which is now part of the CSIRO, is a national asset run by Adrian Turner, who is in himself a national asset, has significant resources in terms of research and development and linkages with educational institutions to help build our capacity, our research and development capacity, linking in also to the Defence Science and Technology Group, again, a national asset for us, that was once a very bespoke defence-focused research capacity that is increasingly realising that the work they do impacts on the broader economy. So between Data 61 and DSTG, a remarkable tie-in. And then Craig with the Australian Cybersecurity Growth Network, a not-for-profit of which the Commonwealth is the funding source, designed to help those startups and scale-ups to pick winners, frankly, in the community of quite remarkable thinking. Adrian Turner talks about this concept that we have and feel free to correct me, Craig, if I'm wrong, the fourth highest patent rate in the world when it comes to network security. Fourth highest patent rate. But we have, of course, one of the poorest commercialisation rates in the world. So there's an opportunity for us. Good thinkers, smart people. And I don't want to take what Craig will be saying, but you should look at the sector competitiveness plan that the Growth Network published, because it looks at that broad, very broad economy, that huge and growing economy of cybersecurity that is in and of itself economically smart for us to be part of, and says which parts could we win in. Now, it's an educated attempt to determine and to define which bits of that very large and very broad economy Australia can play. So we're trying to be smart about this. We're putting real money, we're putting real effort into helping grow that sovereign capacity. So as I say, economically, that's good for us as a country. I meet far too many really smart people who tell me the story that they had great IP, they came to try to sell it to government. They tend not to speak too kindly of us because they'll say, you didn't buy our stuff. So I went to the US and I sold it to Homeland Security, to NSA, to CIA, to FBI, and then I came back to try to sell it to you still, and of course you still wouldn't take it because we were too small, we were too niche, we were too new. And then we were acquired by someone larger, I sold out, and then you buy my stuff. Now, we're not saying that you should buy Australian cybersecurity products at a rate that is disproportionate to the quality of those products. But I am saying that as a Commonwealth, that we're increasingly looking at those products and matching them against international products. And we have a new digital marketplace, part of the Digital Transformation Agency, where the Commonwealth is increasingly committed to buying those services from small businesses, and a whole heap of activities that Craig will tell you about. So between the concept of more defenders on the wall, more information sharing, joint cybersecurity centres starting to pop up around the country, where we have a lot to learn, by the way, but a commitment that we will partner. To a leadership team that goes across from a Prime Minister to a Minister to an ambassador who is marshalling those services, through to a Data 61, through to a growth network. We have an ecosystem change. And it's the change in the ecosystem that is the success of the strategy. It's the change in the ecosystem that allows that conversation that we're having to be very different to the one that we would have been having this time last year. And it is a different conversation. And I talk about the concept of the stars being aligned. Most of the people here, certainly the people on this table, and a lot of the faces I see in the audience, people I've dealt with for years, people like James there from Microsoft. I mean, the reality is we've all been pushing this for so long. We've pushed it for so long. What's different about 2017 is the stars have aligned for success. The stars have aligned. We actually have political pressure, sometimes brought about through near-miss crisis, sometimes just brought about by the sheer fact that you cannot deny that cybersecurity underpins that future social and economic growth that will come from these connected devices. Pressure from industry, a real passion, a cry out from industry to actually partner with us and for us to do it in a way that we've never done before. A bureaucracy that actually is starting to wake up to that fact, not just in Canberra, but Maria, who was meant to be sitting beside us today in terms of the new CISO from the New South Wales government. There are increasingly state governments around this country having this conversation. And twice now, I have been to COAG and spoken with premiers and chief ministers about issues of cybersecurity. A remarkable thing. Never before. Terrorism, yeah, absolutely. Lots of other things, of course, about economic and health and social, all really important things. Never has cyber been on a COAG agenda before. Twice, the last two COAGs has had a significant component in relation to how we can partner between the Commonwealth and the states and territories on this. And it's not a stressful conversation. It's a good one. And increasingly, as I go around to the state capitals and meet with their cabinets, meet with the heads of their departments and agencies, and meet with their politicians, they're not asking what's in it for them. They're asking, how can we partner with you to make sure that we actually do grow this thing? And I'm sure Craig can tell you stories as he goes around the country building nodes to the growth network just the visceral conversations that we're having that actually mean something, that are tangible. So we have the political pressure, we have the industry pressure, we have the states and territories on side, and frankly, we have people in their lounge rooms actually having conversations with us now in a much more educated way. In 2003, when we set up the Australian High-Tech Crime Centre, and if I went and spoke with people and talked to them about this national approach to cybercrime, there was a general view that people didn't understand why. But now when you talk to them, they've all met someone who has lost something before. They've met someone who's had their identity stolen. They've met someone who's been a victim of cybercrime. They saw a WannaCry incident in the media. They heard about the census. They heard about what happened in Washington at the election. And those things matter because of the conversation. And so the ecosystem has changed, and the politicians are engaged, and the pressure on us is enormous. And what I'd say to you is this, that Tuesday week ago, in his update in his national security update to Parliament, the Prime Minister spoke about terrorism and spoke about encryption and spoke about all those things that matter to him as the person ultimately responsible in this country for our security. But there was a significant component again in his update about cybersecurity. And in that speech he said that as a result of things like the WannaCry, near miss, as he would say, that he has asked us to accelerate our cyber resilience ambition. And as a result, we formed a task force to do that. Several people in this room were with us in Canberra yesterday talking about how we can genuinely accelerate our efforts. And it is real, and it will impact all of us to enable this growing digital economy, one that we rely upon so heavily. So, in conclusion, in terms of organisational risk in this cyber environment, we now talk about resilience rather than security. We talk in the boardroom rather than in the server room. And we realise, Berin, that it's a team sport, because Noel said I would say the phrase team sport during my speech, and I have now. So it is truly something that we can't do alone as a Commonwealth, we know that. And frankly, industry can't do it alone. No one can. In a networked world, to respond to the threat environment, we actually genuinely have to work together. The commitment I make is that that's what we're doing from a Commonwealth side. And I can tell you that our political masters through to the bureaucracy are aligned on that. So thank you very much for today, and I look forward to the questions later.